Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Sargent, and this is my take on the Spanish American War. I've got my tea with me, and we're just going to wing it, no script like we always do. And you're probably wondering, Mark, why are you giving us history lessons, especially about the Americans? One, because I am American, but more importantly, because I'm trying to give you kind of lessons on politics and how power works. Especially with something as small. Most people don't even remember that you could ask American students all over the country, including college students. They wouldn't be able to tell you what the Spanish-American War was, who was really involved, what were the motivations, were even the years that were fought. And I'm kind of moving my way backwards in time here. And after this one, I'll probably do the American Civil War, and then the Mexican-American War, and so on and so on. So the reason why this war was important was it was really a forgotten war. It was a move that was made strictly for colonization purposes on the United States part, and you'll see more of what I mean as we get into it. So, as always, let's read the first couple paragraphs of Wiki and see what mainstream says about it. The Spanish-American War was a conflict fought between Spain and the United States in 1898. Hostilities began in the aftermath of the sinking of the United States ship Maine in Havana Harbor, leading to American intervention in the Cuban War of Independence. American acquisition of Spain's Pacific possessions led to its involvement in the Philippine Revolution and ultimately in the Philippine-American War. Revolts against Spanish rule had been occurring for some years in Cuba. There had been war scares before, as the Virginius affair in 1873. In the late 1890s, U.S. public opinion was agitated by anti-Spanish propaganda, led by journalists such as Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, which used yellow journalism to call for war. However, the Hearst and Pulitzer papers circulated among the working class in New York City did not reach a national audience. Historians of the 1930s blame them for stirring up war frenzy, but more recent scholars have not accepted that theory. After the mysterious sinking of the United States Navy battleship Maine in Havana Harbor, political pressures from the Democratic Party pushed the administration of Republican President William McKinley into a war which he had wished to avoid. Spain promised time and again it would reform, but it never delivered. The United States sent an ultimatum to Spain demanding it surrender control of Cuba. First Madrid, then Washington formally declared war. Although the main issue was Cuban independence, excuse me, the 10-week, note I said 10-week war, was fought in both the Caribbean and the Pacific. Excuse me. U.S. naval power proved decisive, allowing expeditionary forces to disembark in Cuba against a Spanish garrison already brought to its knees by nationwide Cuban insurgent attacks and further wasted by yellow fever. Numerically superior Cuban, Philippine, and United States forces obtained the surrender of Santiago de Cuba and Manila, despite the good performance of some Spanish infantry units and fierce fighting for positions such as San Juan Hill. With two obsolete Spanish squadrons sunk in Santiago de Cuba and Manila Bay, and a third, more modern fleet recalled home to protect the Spanish coast, Madrid sued for peace. The result was the 1898 Treaty of Paris, negotiated on terms favorable to the United States, which allowed its temporary control of Cuba and ceded ownership of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippine Islands. The cession of Philippines involved payment of $20 million, which would be $568 million today, to Spain by the United States to cover infrastructure owned by Spain. The defeat and collapse of the Spanish Empire was a profound shock to Spain's national psyche and provoked a thorough philosophical and artistic reevaluation of Spanish society known as the Generation of '98. The United States gained several island possessions spanning the globe, and rancorous new debate over the wisdom of expansionism. The war, exactly 52 years after the beginning of the Mexican-American War, began exactly 52 years. It was one of the only 5 U.S. wars against a total of 11 sovereign states to have been formally declared by Congress. Well, that all being said, what was this all really about? Let's boil all this down into something very, very simple, shall we? This was about American expansionism. This had nothing to do with revolutions or revolts or Cuba or any of that stuff. It had to do with America seeing an opportunity at the end of the century. We were just about to hit 1900, and we'll get into some of the other wiki stuff, and there's a few other wiki things that are pretty interesting. But it was about America seeing the chance to take some land, basically. Everyone knows, if you follow history at all, that the three major powers over a lot of our modern history, or relatively modern history, when it came to sailing empires, were France, Great Britain, and Spain. The big three over there. Way before America was America, there was France, Great Britain, and Spain, and they just slugged it out all the time. The alliances were formed and dissolved and reallied, and it was just ridiculous. After a certain number of centuries, it appeared that France and Great Britain really were head and shoulders above Spain, and around the end of the 1800s, the United States realized that Spain was weak. The Spanish Empire was really on its last legs. They didn't have much left, but they still had colonies around the world, and the Americans said, "Wow." Spain owns basically. Well, let me take it really simple for you. Spain owned the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, and part of and Cuba. And the American says, you know what? I bet we can take it. I bet we can just go in and take these islands, take over these things. But they had no way. Remember, this is the late 1800s. Information traveled fairly slowly through the United States, so they had no way of really revving up. Remember I said in some of the other segments, revving up the population, and so that's exactly what they did. Somehow, mysteriously, and let me see if I can get back down to. Let me find this real quick here. Spanish attitude. There was all sorts of posturing, and then all of a sudden, yeah, here it is, the United States Maine. McKinley sent the USS Maine to Havana to ensure the safety of American citizens and interests, and to underscore the urgent need for reform. Americans don't care about any of that stuff. It makes no difference. Naval forces were moved in position to attack simultaneously on several fronts if the war was not avoided. As the Maine left Florida, a large part of the North Atlantic Squadron was moved to Key West. So they were already positioning our Navy to go in and take these Spanish forces on, but there was no war. No war had started, so why were they moving them all into position? It was like all they had to do was wait for something. Oh, I don't know. The Maine goes in first, okay, and then something happens to it. Well, if something happened to it, which it did. Let's see here. At 9:40 in the evening of February 15th, 1898, the Maine sank in Havana Harbor after suffering a massive explosion. While McKinley urged patience and did not declare that Spain had caused the explosion, the deaths of 266 out of 355 sailors on board focused American attention. McKinley asked Congress to appropriate $50 million for defense, which is a lot of money nowadays, and Congress unanimously obliged. Most American leaders took the position that the cause of the explosion was unknown, but public attention was now riveted on the situation, and Spain could not find a diplomatic solution to avoid war. Spain appealed to the European powers, most of whom advised it to keep U.S. conditions for Cuba in order to avoid war. Accept U.S. conditions. Germany urged a united European stand against the United States, but took no action. The United States Navy's investigation, made public on March 28th, concluded that the ship's powder magazines were ignited when an external explosion was set off underneath the ship's hull. This report poured fuel on popular indignation in the United States, making the war inevitable. Spain's investigation came to the opposite conclusion. The explosion originated within the ship. Other investigations in later years came to various contradictory conclusions, but had no bearing on the coming of the war. In 1974, Admiral Hyman George Rickover said his staff looked at the documents and decided there was an internal explosion. A study commissioned by National Geographic magazine in 1999, using computer modeling, stated the explosion could have been caused by a mine, but no definitive evidence was found. So, what does this mean? Why am I telling you this? Because this comes on the heels of what I said in other segments. And that is, can you put a price on human life, and can you use this human life to your advantage? Yes, in this case, the United States wanted to go for war. This is no different than a giant board game, which is a lot of the world conflicts. They start on a giant board-like game, game like board. In this case, that's what happened. The Americans wanted to take Guam, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. They wanted them. And they couldn't figure out a way to take them and get popular support by both the population and the politicians. They couldn't figure out how to do it. So what do? You take a battleship down there and you sink it. You blow it up. You blew up your own ship, and all of a sudden, the cry comes out. Look it up if you get a chance. You remember the Maine. Oh, those poor sailors. And the Maine goes down. The sailors are killed. Some of them survived, and that's your rallying cry. And all of a sudden, there's your war right away, because the highest echelons of power, they knew a good investment. You sacrifice, in this case, how many? 266 soldiers, sailors, and what do you get? For 266 guys, you get Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. You get those outright. Those are still our bases today, and with a little more effort, you probably could have taken Cuba as well, which would have been really the Hawaii of the East. On the West Coast, we have Hawaii, but on the East Coast, if you had Cuba, America had Cuba, it would have been a vacation destination for everybody. It would have been. In fact, it would have been cheaper because it would have been right off of Florida. It would have been an easy flight. But no, they didn't. They didn't pull that off. And in reparation, they also, the Americans, yeah, they spent quite a bit of money in infrastructure to help rebuild some stuff. But that was just kind of like licking the wounds. It's like, yeah. Basically they decimated that. That was the end of the Spanish Empire. The Americans knew it. They knew Spain had nowhere near the military capability to stop this thing from happening. But they didn't want to say, oh yeah, this is all about expansionism and we just want to increase our empire. That kind of looks bad. So you go the other way and say, well, Spain attacked us. Really? Spain attacked us for no apparent reason. They're just going to attack America. Just going to blow up one of their battleships without any repercussions whatsoever? Of course not. Of course not. It was ridiculous. So let me see here. The Philippines. The Philippines were owned by Spain. For let's see, 333 years. That's significant. Guam, they had that for a long time. Puerto Rico, they had that for a long time. Puerto Rico, if I'm not mistaken, became an official state of America. Let's see here. Cuba. Theodore Roosevelt advocated intervention of Cuba both for the Cuban people and to promote the Monroe Doctrine. While Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he placed the Navy on wartime footing, prepared the Asiatic Squadron for battle, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't take it. Cuban sentiment, the land campaign, I think they could have taken it, but they didn't. It was interesting also, like war heroes go. Much like and we'll get into this in the American Civil War, much like Andrew Jackson, who's on the $20 bill. He was the one that repelled the British during the War of 1812, and he becomes president and then gets on money. Teddy Roosevelt, not to be confused with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, he was involved directly. He was a commander in the Spanish-American War. And what happens? He gets a presidency out of it, and it becomes a very, very popular president. And he called it, and I don't have the quote right in front of me, but he called it, this pretty much says the whole thing. Let's wrap it up for you, which is he called the Spanish-American War a fine little war because it was really, really short. It did not cost a lot of money, and look what you got out of it. You got billions in real estate and tactical advantages. Those islands were not small. I mean, Guam is a massive military base for the United States. Puerto Rico, also a military base in some aspects, and the Philippines, yeah. All these were used in World War II. Let's see, naval operations, let's say U.S. withdrawal, Puerto Rico, making peace. They sued for peace, and we ended up paying them some money. And the aftermath. Okay, so let me read the aftermath for you real quick here. This will kind of explain it. The war lasted 10 weeks. John Hay, the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom, writing from London to his friend Teddy Roosevelt, declared, oh, no, I'm sorry. He was writing to Teddy Roosevelt, but I'm sure Teddy picked it up, declared that it had been a splendid little war. The press showed Northerners and Southerners, blacks and whites, fighting a common foe, helping to ease the scars left from the American Civil War, which was only 30 years earlier. Exemplary of this was the former Confederate States Army generals that served in this war, now in the United States Army, and all of them carrying similar ranks. These officers included Matthew Butler, Fitzhugh Lee, Thomas L. Rosser, and Joseph Wheeler, though only the latter had seen action. Still, in an exciting moment during the Battle of Las Guasimas, Wheeler apparently forgot for a moment which war he was fighting, having supposedly called out, "Let's go, boys, we've got the damn Yankees on the run again." That's great. That's awesome. Let's see. The war marked American entry into world affairs. Since then, the United States has had a significant hand in various conflicts around the world and entered many treaties and agreement. The Panic of 1893 was over at this point, and the United States entered a long and prosperous period of economic and population growth and technological innovation that lasted through the 1920s. The war redefined national identity, served as a solution of sorts to the social divisions plaguing the American mind, and provided a model for all future news reporting. Didn't it though? Because the news was the media. This was actually one of the first times the media actually steered the country. They steered the country into war. They wanted it to happen, and all they had to do was all the government had to do was provide an incident. The battleship blows up. The media just puts it out there and promotes all sorts of speculation, but they lean the population. It's like, oh yeah, you didn't have to say that Spain did it. All you have to do was hint that that Spain did it, and that's what the population latched onto. It worked. It worked. And I'm looking at a picture right here. By the end of the war, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt musters out of the United States Army after the required 30-day quarantine period at Montauk, Long Island. And and he ended up becoming president. Very, very popular president. Let's see. I'm not going to go into too much about American imperialism because we kind of covered that. And the war greatly reduced the Spanish Empire. Well, I'll say it almost finished them off. I mean, Spain as an empire, I think, was pretty much done. And then Cuba became really their own independence. Caused national trauma because of the affinity of peninsular Spaniards with Cuba, which was seen as another province of Spain. That was no longer. And let's see if there's anything else. The U.S. annexed the former Spanish colonies of Puerto Rico. Yeah, and right after that, the U.S. annexed. That's a nice way for saying war trophies. Let's end with this, shall we? Let's call it what it is. I'm not going to drag this one out. The United States annexed the former Spanish colonies of Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. That's what they wanted. That's what they got. And with a little more effort, I think if they had to do it over again, I think they would have taken Cuba too. So there you go. There's imperialism at its finest. You figure out a way to go to war, which again is revenge. That's always been the easiest way. It always will be the easiest way. You get the revenge factor going in. People go to war, and since you had no military force to fight against, you mop them up really, really fast. And I will tell one more story before I go. And I'm not going to do it justice necessarily because I'm not going to try to find it in here because we're just kind of winging it. Which is, not only was this war over in 10 weeks, there were parts of, remember, because this is, in the late 1800s, there were parts of the Spanish Empire that didn't even know they were at war. And there was this one great story where this American naval ship pulls into this harbor. And the base commander, from Spain was on the shore, and he's like, "Oh, the Americans here. We should go out and greet them." So he sends out this small contingency of boats, and they go out into the harbor, and it's like, "Hey guys, what's going on? Glad you're here. Blah blah blah." Ready to shake hands and show them the town, and the American Navy's going, "What are you doing? We're at war right now." And it's like, what are you talking about? It's like, did you not get the memo? It's like, no, they hadn't got the memo. So the guys had to turn around. They didn't blow them out of the water. They had to turn around, go back, and then, posture that these guys were being fought against. It shows you how you can use the media and the speed of the media to your advantage. It got everybody up hyped for war, and you were already in the process of war before the Spanish even knew what was going on. It was great. So, yeah, there you have it. You want there's some how clever the Americans. That's how clever they are. Is it right or wrong? I don't know. They took them. If you're on the American side, you're going to say, well, if we didn't take it, somebody else would have. Maybe, but. It is what it is. So it's just a little history lesson for you, and we'll be covering more of these as we go on. So thank you very much, guys, for listening, and see you next segment.